And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another episode of Doing the Work, the first show on the Back Home Network covering IU women's basketball. This is our 77th episode, recorded on Wednesday, October the 11th. I'm your host, Jeff Marlow, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Kathy Amos. And tonight we were joined by our special guest, Kyle Huesmann. Kyle is from the Hawkeye Report, and he's going to help us go over two of the top teams in the Big Ten this year, Iowa and Ohio State. But as usual, we'll start this show with our Hoosier Proud banner moment. And Kathy, I really was kind of struggling for a banner moment, so I'll even give you a chance maybe to see if you have one better in mind. But I'm going to go to back over to Spain, and over the weekend, Grace Berger doing Grace Berger things as an IU alum with a game winner for her Spanish League team over in Spain. So that's going to be my banner moment for tonight. You got anything better?
No, it's been a slowish week, which is probably good for us right now. So yeah, I think that's probably at least the newest thing that's come out since then, other than maybe media days. But I don't know that I'd call that a banner moment. It just is what it is.
And our banner moment is brought to you by Home Field Apparel, presenting sponsor of the Back Home Network, which includes Assembly Call and Crimson Cast along with us. Home Field is constantly releasing new schools or updating their products for schools in their existing line. You are bound to find something for you or anyone in your life that just loves great collegiate gear. They are constantly releasing new merchandise. Not only do you get quality apparel, but you are supporting an Indiana-based business that has its roots in the Kelley School of Business. Go to homefieldapparel.com and use our promo code HOME23. That's new now, HOME23, to get 15% off your entire first order. That's promo code HOME23 for 15% off. And they put this out on Assembly Call, Kathy, last week. So a little trick here: if you've ordered something from Home Field, try a different email, and you might be able to still get the 15% off on your order. And the guys at Home Field seem to be okay with that. So once again, the website is homefieldapparel.com. Wear one for the team. And so some news headlines as well from around the Hoosier land this week. Coach Terry Moore, as Kathy mentioned, along with Mackenzie Holmes and Chloe Morton-McNeil, traveled to Minneapolis Monday for Big Ten Media Day. Also, just saw this one the other day. The NCAA has made changes to the transfer portal. Now athletes will have 45 days to enter the portal following Selection Sunday. They can still take longer to make their choice about where they want to end up, but the time starts now after Selection Sunday. And I got to thinking about that. I wonder if that would, the women's seems to always be Selection Monday. So will it be, for them will be a day later, but I'm not sure that makes a huge change. Also,
I think they changed to Sunday last year or 2 years ago, Jeff. They do a back-to-back.
I still think it was Monday. Okay.
Yep.
Also, we're not trying to bring politics into the podcast or anything, but we do want to send our thoughts and stuff to Yarden Garzon and her family in Israel. I'm sure it's quite the stress maker right now for Yarden to be going through practice and school and having to worry about what's going on halfway around the world. Coach Morin reported at Big Ten Media Day that Charnice Curry-Jelks is dealing with a hamstring injury that has limited her practice time. And then just today, IU announced the addition of a game on December 3rd versus Stetson, the Hatters, at home. Game time is 2 o'clock Eastern, 1 Central, and that game will be on BTN+. So now it gives me the opportunity to welcome in our guest, Kyle Huesmann. Kyle, back for the second time. He joined me last year for a podcast that Kathy wasn't able to be here for. But Kyle, welcome back to Doing the Work.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's good to be back. Last year we had a good conversation about not only Iowa, but Big Ten women's basketball in general. And we're back again. The season starts here under a month now until the season starts.
And Kyle, go ahead, Kathy.
I was just going to say, I guess for you guys, actually, for Iowa, you'll start this Sunday with a huge exhibition that against DePaul. So that'll be for those of you who maybe haven't heard, if you follow Indiana women's basketball in general. I'm sure you have heard, but that's the game that's going to be played in Kinnick Stadium. So I'm assuming we were talking about the weather forecast before we went live here. So for us in Iowa here in the middle of the state, I think it looks like the weather should hold out. And so that should be a nice record-breaking crowd for you guys to get that season started, even if it's an exhibition game. It's very exciting.
Yeah, it's going to be – I'm actually really excited to just see it. Obviously for a couple of reasons, to just see, potentially 50,000 people in Kinnick Stadium if the weather holds. And then just to see the team play, DePaul, a Division I team, they have their exhibition on October 22nd against Clark University. But to see them play a Division I team, DePaul, these are the normal closed scrimmages, but they get this out there. They're giving all the money to the Children's Hospital, and we get to, as media members and fans, get to kind of see that extra game that you normally wouldn't get to see, which is the other exciting part of it.
Yeah, it's very cool.
And Kyle, can I give you a chance here? We talked a little bit about a couple of the comments Coach Morton made at Media Day, especially the one where kind of because the IU program is pretty. I hate to use the word secretive, but they're pretty hush about the injuries and anything like that. It's almost like an NHL hockey, an NHL injury report, upper body, lower body, or just we'll evaluate, let you never really find out. So, was there anything that Lisa Bluter had to say at Media Day that caught your attention?
In terms of injuries, no. The only thing that's really stood out was Kylie Fierbach is back to 100% now. She's practicing. She's getting ready for the season as normal. She tore ACL last year and missed the entire season, so that was good. But in terms of everything overall, I can also go back to, we had our team, the team media day at Carver Hawkeye Arena last week, and not a lot stood out to me, just kind of your normal stuff that we'll get into here in a little bit. The big thing that, if there was one thing that stood out, it's going to be about Caitlin Clark and her potential decision to take a fifth year or go to the WNBA for next season. It sounds like she's going to, at least what I got from it, is that she's looking to push that probably towards the end of the season. Didn't really sound like she was leaning either way. Kind of just said it's, whenever it comes to her, it's going to be, the decision is just going to be a gut decision. And whenever she comes to that decision, she's going to let everyone know. But for me, I feel like that decision isn't going to come in the middle of the Big Ten season or the middle of non-conference. It's not going to be something that happens during the season. And, with the kickoff at Kennett, or the crossover at Kennett coming up, and then an exhibition game, just after that, it feels like if she wanted to do it, Team Media Day was probably going to be the time to do it. Now you're getting into exhibitions and season. I think this is going to be a decision that's going to come after the NCAA tournament, whenever their season wraps up, and then she'll get I believe it's something like 72 hours after the Final Four is when she has to make a decision. I think that's about when it's going to come.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this last year on the podcast, Kyle, and I'm not trying for you to necessarily bring up any numbers or anything, but just kind of shows you how NIL, especially in the women's game, NIL's maybe changed some of the decisions these young women are going to be able to make.
Yeah, I think the thing that I've discussed with other people is I feel like most of Caitlin Clark's NIL deals will roll over to the WNBA. So I know a lot of people are arguing, she's making a lot of money in college, she should stay another year. But I mean, some of her deals, she just signed on a State Farm. She has a Nike deal, her Hy-Vee deal. I think those will roll over into the WNBA. I don't see those changing. So I mean, there may be a couple that don't stay, but the big ones, the Nike, the new one, the State Farm, and obviously the Hy-Vee one, those are going to roll over into the WNBA, and then she'll just be adding in a WNBA salary. That's not me saying that she's going to leave, because I don't truly know the answer right now. But that argument of she's making more money in college, I think that money is going to continue on when she goes to the WNBA.
Good point.
Yeah, that's the interesting, because I was just having that conversation literally last night with my husband, and I said the same thing, because he's like, "Oh yeah, did you see the State Farm deal?" I said, "Well, I didn't see an amount or anything, but I was assuming, just like what you said, just because if she plays college next year or she's in the pros, those still carry over." So that's kind of our speculation. And for our IU fans, breaking news, for those of you listening live, and if you're listening later, hopefully you've heard this, Indiana just beat Purdue in volleyball for the first time in 11 years. So Purdue is ranked 15th. And so this is a really huge win again for our volleyball team. So I know we're a basketball podcast, but many of us are a lot of all IU sports. So I just wanted to throw that in there too. All right, Jeff, back to you. With our breaking news moment.
So, Kathy, you got anything you want to ask Kyle before we dive into the Iowa win?
Yeah.
You got anything you want to ask?
No,
Kyle
nothing to ask Kyle. I did want to just touch real quick on your headlines. I did also want to just echo your sentiments going out to Yarden Gazan. For those of you hopefully remember, Yarden is from Israel. She came to us last year as a freshman. So I'm sure that's very stressful for everyone involved. And so hopefully everyone and her family is safe over there. So just wanted to throw my thoughts out there for her as well as.
Okay. So let's dive into the Iowa.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's dive into the Iowa women here. Preseason in the Big Ten preseason poll, they were picked first in the coaches and by the media to finish to win the league. Going back to last year, they were the national runner-up, losing the title game to LSU. They were the Big Ten tournament champs. They come into this season with an ESPN way too early ranking of number 6. 3 starters coming back, and they do lose 2 of their top 3 scorers from last year. And so I think that's something we'll probably try to dig in with Kyle here a little bit. But obviously the one player everybody's going to know, and that we mentioned already, is Caitlin Clark, the preseason player of the year in the Big Ten. More than likely, I would assume the preseason player of the year nationally as well. But Kyle, just kind of get in to talk a little bit about Caitlin Clark. And there's all the superlatives you can use. But when you watch her play, are there any like subtle things that you notice game to game that maybe some people that don't get to see her play every night don't see?
Man, that's a tough question. The subtle things. I mean, I think the thing that stands out to me, and I wouldn't say that not.
Is there anything subtle about Caitlin Clark?
I mean, no,
I don't know if there's anything subtle about Caitlin. Yeah.
No, I don't. I agree with that. The thing that stands out to me, and people always talk about, she scores a lot of points. I think the word gets thrown around that she's a ball hog at times, and I don't think that's the case at all, because she leads the country in assists as well. The thing that stands out to me, not only about leading the country in assists, is some of the passes that she can make, whether it's, in an offensive set, finding it usually was to Monica Sonano for an easy basket, but in transition to find, she found a lot of connections with freshman Hannah Stolke last year in transition. But when you're at the game and you're sitting at the media level, you can sometimes see the angles of some of the passes that you can't necessarily see on TV. And that's what stands out to me, is her ability to decide, I can fit this pass in there. And sometimes, there's somewhere I'm like, what are you doing here? And it just finds someone. So her court vision is something that I'm sure a lot of people have noticed and think is really good about her. But to me, that's kind of the thing that sometimes gets lost in all the, the logo 3-pointers and the scoring, 40 points in the Final Four, is her ability to pass and hit small windows.
Yeah, so you mentioned Monica Sonano. So Monica exhausted all of her eligibility, but in addition, McKenna Warnock was the other starter that's leaving. She did have another year. She decided to forego to go on to dental school. Between the two of them, they averaged 27 and 29 minutes respectively. Monica averaged around 17 points per game and McKenna just under 11. So I think for me, and Jeff probably echo the same thing you and I have talked about, that's the biggest question for me with Iowa, is who's going to replace that kind of production. That's a lot of production between two of your starters. So the name I keep hearing a lot thrown around is, of course, Hannah Stolke. So she was a freshman last year, Big 12. I don't know where that came from. Big 10 sixth player of the year. What are your thoughts? Do you think Hannah can jump in and take up some of the slack the gap that'll be lost with Monica and McKenna?
Yeah, I think that's certainly the thought process for the coaching staff, the fan base, and that the media has. First off, yeah, the losses of Monica and McKenna are huge losses. I mean, there's not many players in the country that, you guys have one in Mackenzie Holmes that can also shoot at a really high clip from really close to the basket. 70% is pretty impressive to be in the top 5. I think it was top 5 4 years in a row in field goal percentage. That's pretty unheard of. So to lose her is obviously a big loss. And then what McKenna Warnock brought from, inside presence on defense and on offense, and then from the perimeter to be able to take and knock down 3-pointers. Those are 2 really big losses. Played for a really long time at Iowa and obviously had accolades to go along with that. So I don't want to downplay those losses. I do feel like, Iowa has the pieces to fill that this year. And you mentioned Hannah Stolke, Big Ten sixth player of the year last year as a true freshman. Last year, the thing that stood out to me is she's a really athletic player for a true freshman coming right out of high school to step in and show the athleticism that she did, to rebound both offensively and defensively. I haven't seen a lot of players be able to run in transition the way she does. If she's not the one grabbing the rebound, if it's someone else, she's just putting her head down and running to the other end. And, Caitlin can find her a lot of times in transition because she just beats the other team down the floor. But as a freshman last year, she had some of those issues that you see with freshmen, foul trouble at times. She'd come in sometimes in a 5-minute span, she's already picked up a couple of fouls and she's got to sit down again. Her free throw shooting was not great. I believe it was right around 50%. And then this offseason, she's really worked on, trying to get that shot better from the perimeter, trying to be able to be a player that can, not necessarily shoot at McKenna Warnock's level, which was right around 40%, but, enough that people have to guard her out there. So I think she takes, a lot of really good freshmen take big jumps going into their sophomore year. Your freshman year is, really about just trying to get worked into the college game, figuring out what works for you, what doesn't work for you. I know the coaching staff is really expecting a big jump from her, and I expect the same. I've heard a lot of good things about, that her free throw shooting is improving, that she's really worked on her shot from the perimeter, and that it's getting a lot better. So I think the hope is that she can become, a player that can fill the points that were lost from McKenna Warnock. So I'm personally really excited to see her this year, see the jump that she makes as a sophomore. And I know the fan base is too. She's just from up the road in Cedar Rapids, so she's kind of a fan favorite. Grew up a Hawkeye fan, so I think she's going to be definitely one to watch this year. And then you mentioned Monica Sana, her replacement, Addie O'Grady, didn't get a ton of minutes in her first 2 years, just kind of here and there. When you have someone like Monica Sonano, it's hard to get a lot of minutes. She did get playing time towards the end of the year in the NCAA tournament, in the Final Four specifically. Did a really solid job as a backup center in the national championship game against LSU. And from what I've spoke with her, she said that was really kind of a confidence booster, to not play a lot the whole year. And even in the middle of the year, there were games where she wasn't playing at all. But she said to go out there in the Final Four in the national championship against LSU and rack up 4 or 5 rebounds, a couple of blocks on that big of a stage, to her was just a big confidence boost going into the offseason. I know the coaching staff has really talked about, where she's improved this offseason. But they still said there's not a huge gap between the ones behind her, which is, AJ Ediger and Sharon Goodman, who's coming back from an ACL surgery as well. So, I think the big thing for Iowa in the starting lineup is if Hannah Stolke can step in and be someone that scores double-digit points, that would be really helpful. And then in the post, you don't need Addie O'Grady to be Monica Sonano, and the coaching staff's talked about that a lot. And Addie said the same thing, that when Monica left Iowa, her message to Addie was, you don't have to be me. Monica Sonano came into the program right after Megan Gustafson, who was the National Player of the Year, and Megan told Monica, you don't have to be me. You just have to be yourself. And that's what Monica told Addie, and the coaching staff is instilling that in Addie, that she just needs to be herself because she's already a good player. So I'm really excited to see her, in this exhibition on Sunday against DePaul, and then their exhibition against Clark University, just to see where both her and Hannah Stolke are in terms of big jumps. But those are probably going to be your 2 players that come into the starting lineup this year.
And I want to go back to the player you mentioned a few minutes ago, Kyle, and one that, at least on paper, that intrigues me just because having played in the Big 12 before she transferred to Iowa and got injured last year, and that's Kylie Feuerbach. I hope I'm saying it right. Just tell us a little bit about her, and if she is healthy, full go, ready to go, what can she bring to this team?
Yeah, she's a part of a really interesting group of guards that are going to be coming off the bench this year. She came from Iowa State after her freshman year. She played as a sophomore at Iowa now 2 years ago. Was a player that came off the bench, played minutes, is a decent defender. She's going to pressure you a bit. She can get some steals, and then offensively, she shows the ability to drive to the hoop at times. Shoots from outside a decent decent clip, I should say. But as a sophomore, still trying to improve on some things. And then she missed all of last season. I know the coaching staff last year had said that she was practicing really well, and it was tough to see her go down with the ACL injury. But at this point, it's all about how do you come back from that. It sounds like she's been practicing pretty well. Like I said, she's back to 100%. It'll be interesting to see where her role takes this year because, like I said, this is a pretty crowded guard room. You talk about Caitlin Clark at the point guard position, and then you have Gabby Marshall and Kate Martin who are back, and they're starting their 4th year as a starter. So your starting 3 are pretty set, and they're going to play a lot of minutes. And then, off the bench, you've got players that played last year. She was out, so people had to fill that role. Molly Davis came up from Central Michigan and played. Sydney Folter is another one that's going to get minutes. And then Taylor McCabe was a freshman last year. I think a lot of people are hoping that she gets a bigger role this year. So along with those 3, along with Kylie, are going to be really kind of fighting for minutes this year. And that's kind of the biggest question I have outside of, the Hannah Stolke and Addie O'Grady is, how does this guard lineup off the bench, come together? Because Sydney Folter had a really good trip to Europe. The 3 games that they played, rebounded really well, showed the ability to score more than she has in her career so far. I've heard a lot about Molly Davis becoming more comfortable as a scorer, now that this is her 2nd year with the team. Moving from Central Michigan to the Big Ten is a big jump. So it's not surprising to hear that she's taking a step forward. And then obviously Taylor McCabe's ability to shoot from 3-point line. I believe she has the Nebraska record for girls basketball for 3-pointers in a career. So that's hard to keep on the bench as well. And then you add in Kylie. It sounds like they've got a lot of pieces to use off the bench at guard. It'll be interesting to see how they use them. Do they try to play a smaller lineup to get more of them on the floor at times? But to me, that's the question that I have is how do you balance trying to get all 4 of those players on the floor? So to answer your question, I really don't know what her role is going to be at this point because, she came off the ACL tear, didn't really have a role with the team last year, obviously, because she didn't play in the game. So she's got to kind of carve out a new role again, coming back from that injury.
So you mentioned Addison O'Grady and that she's probably going to fill that, at least the starting position, not necessarily the exact same role that Monica left. So from a backup perspective, though, who do you think would take that, 5 position kind of backup coming in off the bench for Addison? And who do you think that will be?
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting question because they do have AJ Ediger. They do have Sharon Goodman. Sharon Goodman was actually the backup for Monica a couple of years ago now, before that ACL injury last year. She kind of had a slow first year back from the ACL injury. She wasn't out last season, but was still kind of working back. I know she wore a knee brace for most of the season, which kind of hindered her a bit. And then AJ Ediger is a junior this year. But actually, the coaching staff feels pretty comfortable with playing Hannah Stolke at the 5. I don't know that it's necessarily their first option. That's why they really wanted Addie O'Grady to get to the point where they feel like they can start her. But Hannah Stolke got time at the 5 last year. And if you run her at the 5, you have the ability to run a pretty small lineup with her at the 5. And if you have Hannah Stolke playing at post, you're going to have a really fast lineup on the floor. Not many teams are going to be able to defend that with their speed that they would have. The question with that type of lineup would be, can they defend well enough against maybe a taller lineup? Can they rebound? So I'm interested to see if AJ Ediger and Sharon Goodman have taken a step forward to be able to be a backup 5. Sharon Goodman did a pretty solid job a couple of years ago, but that's a couple of years removed from having that role. So it'll be interesting to see if she can get back to that spot. But my thought right now is that Hannah Stolke would probably be, the one that could slide into that spot for the majority of the minutes. And then it would be Sharon Goodman or AJ Ediger that could come in and get a few minutes there as well. But I'll be interested to see, again, this is another thing that I'll look at on Sunday, just kind of, what are they getting from those two? Can either of them, move into that role to get some minutes at the 5?
Yeah, they're definitely very guard heavy. I just pulled up the roster again here, and what do I count? Around 10 guards? Does that sound about right? And then just a few forwards and 2 centers sprinkled in. So yeah, definitely, it seems like a definitely guard heavy type of team.
Yeah, and they're really deep. They're really deep at that spot, and I think that's important to have that kind of flexibility, especially when you talk about going to maybe a smaller lineup at times. You like to be able to slide in an extra guard in there. And if you have that, I was just talking about how are you going to spread the minutes around. You don't necessarily want to be a player that's going to find the short end of that. But if you're the coaching staff and you're talking about, we're running out of minutes and we feel like so and so deserves minutes, but they're not getting that much. That's when you start talking about, hey, if something happens where someone goes down with an injury, we feel pretty comfortable. But yeah, that guard group is really, really deep off the bench. And I talked about the starters, they're not coming off the floor a lot. So it's a really, really deep group. I'm really excited to see what they can do this year.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to it, but I'm really intrigued by that idea of the smaller lineup, because I really think with your lineup, with your roster, the way it's kind of built, that would be kind of the way I would go. But again, the big concern there, especially for when you go up against a team like IU, can she battle a Mackenzie Holmes and we're on the glass and maybe a couple of the other with that? But yeah, I would be really intrigued by them going to a little bit smaller lineup and playing Stolke at the 5. Which was I kind of maybe thought, I'm glad we had you on, Kyle. I thought maybe Hannah would be sliding into that 5 spot anyway. So glad you came on to clear that up. I want to kind of go back real quick though, and again, I'm not trying to sound cliche type questions here. I'm just not sure how I phrase it, but Gabby Marshall and Kate Martin, I mean, to me, they're unsung heroes. I mean, obviously Caitlin gets all the publicity for all the right reasons. I'm not trying to minimize any of that. But you need kids like Marshall and Martin who can just bury shots and live off of what they get from Caitlin. They don't have to create their own stuff. So just maybe talk a little bit about Gabby Marshall and Kate Martin for us. Yeah,
I'm actually glad you brought them up, because it's funny. This season, all the questions are about, Hannah Stolke and Addie O'Grady. How do you replace Warnock and Sonano? And then, stuff off the bench. The funny part is that, Gabby Marshall and Kate, and obviously Caitlin Clark gets a lot of the talk as well. The funny part is Gabby Marshall and Kate Martin, they're returning for their 4th straight year in the starting lineup. There's not a lot of talk about them because you just kind of know what you're going to get from them. They're going to put up good games every night, and they're going to do their part, putting their points, their rebounds, their assists up on the board. And there's no real questions about what you're going to get from them, which is kind of why they just get filed away as we know what they're going to do. Well, let's ask the questions about what we don't know. But yeah, those were both huge. They didn't have to come back. Kate Martin's come back for her 6th year. I think some people kind of wondered, was Gabby Marshall going to take her 5th year at another school, grad transfer to another school? But she's back for her 5th year. And those are 2 huge people to have back in terms of just experience. I mean, to have players starting for a 4th year in a row, that's huge. Kate Martin obviously is just a leader of this team. The term that gets thrown out is the glue of the team. She's always going to give you, the few points, a few rebounds, a few assists, a few moments of leadership on the floor. I've heard that she's, maybe even taken a jump over the offseason in terms of becoming a better shooter. And then Gabby Marshall obviously is already a fantastic shooter, a really underrated defender. Caitlin Clark loves to point that out, that Gabby Marshall is a really good defender, is always guarding the other team's best player. And Gabby did a really good job during the NCAA tournament, specifically against Haley Van Lith in that Elite 8 game. Haley had a good first half and I don't believe scored in the second half even, maybe just a couple of points. But Gabby, what you're going to get from Gabby is really good 3-point shooting. The first half of the season last year, she struggled a bit. And when they needed her down the stretch, Big Ten tournament, NCAA tournament, she was hitting her shots. And when she's hitting from the 3-point line, we're not talking about, 35, 40%. When she's really going, it's 45, almost 50% at times. So obviously 2 huge pieces to have back in terms of experience, in terms of, being able to score points. Kate Martin's another player that can shoot it from 3 well. I've heard she's getting a little bit more consistent. Last year at times it was either it was going in or it wasn't going in. So if she can kind of iron that out and be a consistent shooter, that's even bigger to add into what she already does in terms of giving a little bit of everything. But yeah, just 2 huge players to have back, especially when you're talking about losing McKenna Warnock and Monica Sonata. Just to have those 2, and then Caitlin Clark to kind of lead this team, especially early in the season when there's going to be some bumps in the road when you're breaking in a new lineup, breaking up in some new players. So I think those. Honestly, I'm just really glad that you brought them up because there hasn't been a lot of talk about them. And like I said, it's just because you know what you're going to get from them. So just 2 really big pieces of this team.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought them up, Jeff, because that's who I was going to bring up next myself. Because I actually wondered when I was, really taking a deeper dive into the roster preparing for tonight, if maybe their production goes up as well to kind of, again, help, fill those gaps that you'll be losing with Sonano and with Warnock, and to your point with the consistency, if you look at their points per game, Gabby Marshall, the last 3 years, she averaged right at, 9, 7, and 6. And so definitely very consistent. The same thing from Kate Martin. She was very consistent in around 7 points per game in each of her last 3 years. And so in terms of consistency, it's there. It hasn't been a lot of double-digit scoring, but to your point, they can do it when needed. And so I wonder if that's going to be maybe a little more needed from them this year to, we talked about that on our side about who's going to fill in for Grace. And we don't think it's going to be one person, right? It's going to be more like a committee. And I think that at least that's what I wonder. Do you think that may be the same case for Iowa, filling in for both Sonano and Warnock, that it's going to be not just one person, it's just really going to have to be a committee of people jumping in, filling those minutes and the points in?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, actually, that, and I mentioned earlier that Addie O'Grady does not have to be Monica Sonano and Hannah Stolke doesn't have to be McKenna Warnock. Obviously, they're going to have to score their points if they're going to be in the starting lineup, but obviously, like we mentioned at the beginning, Monica Sonano and McKenna Warnock combined for 28 points a game last year. That's a big chunk out of your team to lose, especially when I was scoring 87 points a game. But Hannah Stolke scored 6.5 last year. I think she can be a double-digit scorer this year. And that would take a big chunk out of that 28 right away. If Addie O'Grady, she doesn't have to be that 18-point, 70% from the floor shooter. But if she can be a 10 points a game and, rebound well, and then you talk about, whether it's Kate Martin adding a point or 2 to her average or Gabby Marshall, that 6.2 points per game is low because she struggled early in the season from the 3-point line. If she can have a consistent year from the 3-point line, she's going to be an 8-point, 8-9 point per game. And when she really hits it, she's going to be a double-digit scorer as well. Whether it's Molly Davis coming off the bench, like I said, she's hoping to be a more comfortable scorer in her second year in the Big Ten. Averaged 4 points a game last year. She can be 6 points a game. You're going to fill that in together right away. And I know everybody wants to talk about can Addie O'Grady get that 18 points, but it's it's not as fun to talk about Molly Davis so she can go from 4 to 6, but that's really how you do it. If that happens, you can easily fill that void that you lost just by a couple of people adding a couple of points. All it is another basket per game, and you can really fill that in quickly. So like I said, it's not two players filling that role, and like you said, it's going to be maybe a little bit of everybody hitting an extra shot a game, grabbing an extra couple of rebounds a game. So like the team's been saying, like Lisa Bluter's been saying, this isn't going to be the exact same Iowa team as last year. They have a lot of the same pieces. But it's just going to be a little bit different way of getting to that 85, 88 points a game. But I absolutely think they can be that high level of scoring team again.
Yeah.
Kyle, I'm going to dive into the schedule here a little bit, and I want to ask you a question just to see if you know the answer. You may not, but looking at the non-conference schedule for Iowa, notice they play Northern Iowa, they play Drake, they play Iowa State. Is there some type of policy that they have to play basically all the D1 Iowa schools, or is that just traditional? Or it just seems like that I know that there are people in Indiana would love to see us play Notre Dame and Butler every year, especially on the men's side. But there's nothing here that says we have to. But I'm just curious that, if there's something out there that requires them to play them.
I don't believe there's anything that requires them. I know on the men's side, that's been a big thing about, why does Iowa not play Drake and UNI in men's basketball? And there's obviously ongoing arguments about that. I don't believe there's anything tied in about, they have to do it. I think, like you said, it's just kind of a traditional thing. They always play them. Lisa Bluter and Jenny Fitzgerald, obviously Lisa, the head coach, and Jenny, one of the assistants, they coached at Drake. So did Jan Jensen, another assistant coach. They coached at Drake for several years. So there's that connection there. UNI, I don't believe there's a connection there right off the top of my head, but it's just tradition to play them. Obviously, Iowa State's never going to be something that goes away. But I don't think, Lisa Bluter always talks about that those are big games, and the players talk about it too. Those are big games for both teams to, that the bragging rights of saying we swept Iowa State, Drake, and UNI. That's a big thing that this team talks about. They want to win those games. And Drake, Iowa last year was a fantastic game. One of the best games of the season at the Knapp Center. Was an overtime game. Overtime at the Knapp Center. I was right courtside. That was a fantastic game. So for me personally, those are fun games. You might get upset once in a while because there's a little bit of extra, fuel there for a UNI or a Drake to come in and try to win that game. That maybe, you don't want on the men's side at times. But it's fun. It's a fun game. And I think it's just a traditional thing.
Okay.
Yeah, so along that same line, in their non-conference, in addition to the three Iowa teams that Jeff already mentioned, the two ranked teams that they are playing are Virginia Tech, which is on a neutral site. Jeff, do you know exactly where that's at?
Kyle can help us on that, but is that the one? Is that like in Vegas?
No, it's in Charlotte.
Okay,
here we go. Charlotte,
Hornets play, I believe.
Okay, but it's there's four teams there. It's almost like it's not like the Champions Classic on the men's side, but it seems like they're trying to get something similar, a little bit similar. It's Virginia Tech, Iowa, but I can't remember what the other game is. I think there's another game.
Are you thinking of I think LSU and Colorado are playing in Las Vegas.
Maybe that's
I think you're thinking. I think it's like LSU, Colorado, and then Ohio State against someone maybe. But Iowa, Virginia Tech are the only two in Charlotte for that game.
Okay.
Yeah. So Virginia Tech is ranked number 7 in there. Have you kind of dove into that matchup yet? Because on paper right now, at least if you're going by the rankings, and I'll be honest, I haven't looked a whole lot at Virginia Tech. Have you looked at that matchup, and how do you think the two teams kind of match up in that game?
Yeah, it's actually going to be really interesting. It's the second game of the season for Iowa. Iowa opens with Fairleigh Dickinson at home, and then 3 days later they're down there in Charlotte for that game. It will be interesting for obviously a couple of reasons. You're talking about two teams that made the Final Four last year. A really high-profile matchup, obviously. So, both teams in the top 10 will probably be in the top 10 next week when the AP poll comes out. It's going to be big for Iowa in terms of, a couple of different storylines. Iowa trying to fill a couple of spots, players that were lost last year. It's an early test to, a measuring stick. Where is Iowa at in terms of, do they have some growing to do as the season goes on to be that team that they were last year? If Iowa comes out and wins that game, it's going to be, hey, they're already there. They're ready to go. They're ready to defend their, spot in the Final Four. But if they lose or lose even convincingly by 10 points or something, it's going to be, hey, there's some work to do to get back to that level. The matchup that is going to be really important is that Elizabeth Kitley's back for Virginia Tech, All-American center. She's going to be going up against Addie O'Grady right away in that second game. So we're going to see Addie O'Grady right away go up against a really good center. See where she's at in terms of that process of growing into that starting lineup role. But Virginia Tech's in that top 10 for a reason. They bring back Georgia Moore, who's their guard that helped lead them to the Final Four. Picked up a Matilda Eke, a player from the Big Ten, Michigan State, honorable mention all Big Ten. Was a good scorer for Michigan State. She's on the roster now. Picked up a forward from Minnesota, I believe. Is it Rose Maishu? All Big Ten, honorable mention last year. So they've got a couple of Big Ten players that we've seen. So they're going to be a really good team. Going to be a really interesting matchup for Iowa right out of the gate. I think the thing that will be hard will be if Iowa were to lose that game, just trying to settle down people that are like, hey, we told you Iowa's not going to be as good. You're talking the second game of the season. It's just going to be a really intriguing matchup for both teams. Both teams are going to figure out, hey, where are we standing here? Right at the beginning of the season, what do we need to improve on, things like that. It's not going to give us an answer of how's the end of the season going to go. But that's why you love these matchups, not only to see two top 10 teams go at it right away, but just to see where they're both at, early in the year.
Yeah, for sure.
And then K-State's your other ranked matchup. And Kyle, just give you take a quick dive on what you think that matchup between K-State and Iowa.
Yeah, that was Iowa lost to them last year in Manhattan, Kansas at the Bramlage Coliseum. I was down there for that one. That was a pretty good game, to be honest. Yeah, Kansas State's a really good team. Flirted with making the NCAA tournament, made the WNIT. I believe they made the Sweet 16 round of that tournament before they went out there. But they returned back 4 of their 5 starters. Gabby Gregory was an All Big 12 player, excuse me. They bring back the Glenn sisters, 2 good guards. The big piece for them is getting Ioka Lee back. And, All-American center, tore ACL, missed all of last season. They were able to make the WNIT without her on the team. Now she's back. So, 4 or 5 starters back, and you add her in, they're really returning an entire starting lineup. They come to Carver this year. Obviously, Carver's sold out every game this year, so that'll be a really big home game against a team that Kansas State's going to be a good team. I know you mentioned I think they're 24, 25 in those ESPN rankings. They're going to be good. That's going to be a really good team this year. Ioka Lee is a very good scorer. And another matchup, a week later after that Virginia Tech game, another big matchup for Addie O'Grady in the post to go up against a really good center. So that's a matchup that, I think it kind of gets hidden because of that Virginia Tech, game early. But Kansas State, Iowa is going to be a really good game. And Iowa's going to be looking to avenge that loss from last year.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else then that sticks out to you in the non-conference schedule? I think those were the 2 games that stuck out to Jeff and I, other than, of course, the 3 Iowa games that we mentioned. But yeah, very early for those 2 games to come right back to back within a week of each other and then followed up by Drake. But any other non-conference games we should think about for Iowa?
Yeah, they do play in the Gulf Coast Showcase down in Florida. Their opening matchups against Purdue Fort Wayne should be a pretty comfortable win in the opening round. But after that, it could get interesting. They could get Florida Gulf Coast in that second round, a team that went 31-4 last year, something like that. Based on my early looks, Florida Gulf Coast is, under some changes. I think they lost most of their starting lineup, but they brought in something like 5 or 6 transfers, and all of them did a pretty solid job at their previous schools. So it'll be interesting to see how they gel early in the year. But if they gel pretty well, that's going to be a pretty good Florida Gulf Coast team. Florida Gulf Coast is generally a pretty good team. I think they've won their first round game the last 2 years in the NCAA tournament. And then, if Iowa can get to the championship of that, North Carolina's on the other side of that bracket. Kansas State, who Iowa already plays, is also in that tournament on the other side of the bracket. I think Western Kentucky and Vermont are the other 2. Vermont made the NCAA tournament last year. Western Kentucky was in the WNIT. So nothing, no top 10 teams in there, but North Carolina is going to be a really good team. And obviously Kansas State, we already mentioned. So if Iowa comes out of there, if they were to win that tournament, they're going to get, a couple of good wins in there. And then not necessarily a high profile game. They get Cleveland State in a men's-women's doubleheader at the Wells Fargo Arena in Des Moines, which is kind of, a fun event. Neither team, men's team's playing Florida A&M. Iowa's playing Cleveland State, who had a really good year last year. They bring back the Horizon League Player of the Year, Destiny Leo. So, 2 really good scores in that game with Caitlin Clark and Destiny Leo. But I just wanted to mention that cool event that they're doing, the men's-women's doubleheader over there at Wells Fargo Arena in Des Moines. But that is really what rounds out as, the biggest games on their non-conference schedule.
Yeah, Florida Gulf Coast is sneaky, and because they've been kind of sneaky under the radar, I should say, because that's been a pretty solid program for several years now. And so, Kyle, I just want to throw this kind of as a open ended for you. Just kind of give us your thoughts about Iowa's Big Ten schedule. I mean, they get double plays with Ohio State and Indiana, and then a single play against Maryland. But obviously, those 2 games against Ohio State may end up being very big. And with IU as well. But just give us your overall thoughts about how the Big Ten schedule broke down for the Hawkeyes.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Big Ten's a really good conference, so it's hard to get out of the draw with, saying, oh, we got an easy draw, something like that. Ohio State's a really good team, obviously. Indiana's a really good team, both home and away for those. The single play against Maryland, I believe that's at Maryland.
That's what I have.
Yes, at Maryland. At Maryland, Iowa historically is not good at Maryland. They lost by like 30 last year at Maryland. So that's going to be a tough game as well. I mean, you even talk about, playing Nebraska home and away. Nebraska's going to be probably a pretty good team as well. I mean, if they can get to that level that, we felt like they could have been last year, they're a team that could be in the top 25 as well. Illinois, Shauna Green's doing a good job at Illinois. Iowa gets them at home for one. I mean, it's hard for me to say whether they got a good or a bad draw just because, the Big Ten's so good. It's hard to say, could it have been any harder or any easier? They get Michigan at home. I'm not really sure what they're going to get from Michigan this year. But I think, the big thing is down the stretch, they're going to get a couple of matchups that will help, determine the Big Ten. They get Ohio State to the final game of the season at home. A couple games for that, they've got Illinois at home. They've got Indiana away. Late in February as well.
Mm-hmm.
They get at Nebraska in the middle of February. So there's big games coming down the stretch, and that's kind of been the way the schedule's worked out for Iowa the last couple of years, where some of those big games are coming down the stretch. 2 years ago, they got Michigan in the final game of the season to determine the regular season winner. Last year, Indiana had it locked up, but Iowa got the win at home. That could have ended up being the same thing for the regular season title as well. So it's been kind of important. You don't necessarily want a really backloaded schedule that makes things hard, but you don't mind that big game late in the year, a couple of big games, because you can go into that last half and go, okay, hey, if we can take care of business here, we can win it. And you love that, where it comes down to, hey, if we win this game, we can get it, and not have to worry about, we're playing Minnesota, what happens over here with Indiana or Ohio State. So I think it's nice to have a couple of those big games late in the year.
Yeah, I'm quite sure the Big Ten set up the schedules like this because it was very clear going into last year, Indiana and Iowa were probably favored, and now going into this year, it's Iowa and Ohio State, and just magically they have the last game of the year again. So, not surprised. Jeff, what do you think? Should we move on to Ohio State?
Yeah.
Yeah. You want me to just jump in and give a quick overview about them?
Yep.
All right. So for Ohio State, they are preseason in the conference ranks, expected to finish second from the coaches, third from the media. From ESPN, they are actually on their way to early top 25, ranked number 4 in their preseason. So actually ahead of Iowa. Last year, they were the Big Ten tournament runner-up to Iowa. The interesting thing for me, I think, is the depth for Ohio State. Everyone who started a game last year, it was quite significant with some of the injuries they had, everyone is back except for Taylor Mikesell. And if you look at the experience of their team, 8 of their players are either seniors, fifth-year seniors, or grad students. And so to me, I think that's the headline for Ohio State for me. But Kyle, what are your thoughts initially on Ohio State and what they have coming back?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ohio State's going to be a really good team, really tough team. I mean, I would not argue with you if you said if someone said, I think Ohio State's the best team in the Big Ten, just because of some of those questions that we talked about with Iowa. Obviously, like I said, I think Iowa can win the Big Ten title. I think they can be at that level. But when you talk like those things you just mentioned, 8 seniors or grad students, everyone that started a game is back except Taylor Mikesell. Those are the things that you look for in the preseason in terms of picking a conference winner. It doesn't necessarily work out, but it's not very common when you're picking a team that has a bunch of questions for the season to win a conference. So I wouldn't fault anyone for picking an Ohio State or even an Indiana to win the Big Ten over Iowa. Iowa actually fared really well against Ohio State last year. So kind of surprisingly, not necessarily surprising that Iowa won them, but that they handled them so well. They played that game at Ohio State without McKenna Warnock and ended Ohio State's undefeated run to start the year. And then just absolutely blasted them in the Big Ten title game. in Minneapolis. So I was a little surprised that those games weren't, closely contested right down to the wire. But I think they will be this year with what Ohio State brings back. I think they're a really talented team. Taylor Mikesell is a really good player. But yeah, they bring back a lot of really good talent.
Yeah, I will. Go ahead, Kathy. Go ahead.
I just wanted to follow up for our listeners in case they didn't realize that often we hear about, they lost 1 or 2 starters. They lost 1, and we keep talking about the returning starters. They had 8 different players start at least 1 game last year. In fact, the least number was Madison Green, and that was 7. I think that was a lot because of some injuries. They kind of got hit by the injury bug a lot in that middle of the Big Ten conference schedule last year. So just to add that context for our listeners, maybe if they didn't realize how many starters they had. So of the 8, 7 are coming back. Yeah.
Well, okay, and I'll be one of those that on paper, I think Ohio State is the team to beat on paper, but they got to prove they can stay healthy. That's been the one problem they've had the last couple of years is they've been hit by the injury bug. So again, they got to be able to stay a little healthy. And I realize there's some luck in that as well. But and Kyle, I want to kind of throw it to you because to me, even though Iowa blasted them up in Minneapolis, the Big Ten title game, I thought the return of J.C. Sheldon was the big difference in that Ohio State team last year when she was able to get back on the floor, and that's when they got hot and made the run, even in the NCAA tournament. But also, I'm intrigued by Madison Green. If she can stay healthy, that she's an all Big Ten caliber type point guard that you throw her in there with J.C. Sheldon and Cody McMahon and some of their other returns. Just maybe give me your thoughts about, like I said, J.C. Sheldon and Madison Green especially.
Yeah, I think J.C. Sheldon, having her back on this team is really important. I know she missed, I don't know how many games she missed last year before she was back.
About 2/3 of the season.
Yeah. So she's a huge player on that team, and it was kind of surprising to see them still be able to cobble it together, especially early in the year to get off to that undefeated start without her was impressive. To have her back, she's a really good player. One of the leaders of that team. And then Madison Green, as you mentioned, another player that's dealt with injuries. And it's, Ohio State's been a really good team, even with those injuries. So to see if they can stay healthy, like you said, Madison Green or J.C. Sheldon or anyone else on that team, if they can stay healthy, man, they like you said, they've got a lot of players that have started games. So they've got a lot of experience, even if they're coming off the bench. It's going to be players that know how to play in a game. They've played, a lot of minutes in games.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think the big thing is like you have down on here on your missed most of the last 2 years for Madison Green. That's a person that can surprise some teams this year. A lot of teams haven't really seen her that much the last couple of years. So early in the year, she could be someone that could surprise some people with how she can play. Build some confidence for her if she can have some good games early. The player that we haven't mentioned yet that I think is, I don't even know what to say about it. Cody McMahon was fantastic last year, freshman player of the year. Yeah. I mentioned what Hannah Stolke was able to do as a freshman for Iowa last year. I talked about the athleticism that she has. I think Cody McMahon came in and did a lot of the things that Hannah did, but just better. She was more polished. Came in and you watched Cody McMahon play, and you were like, this player she's been in the Big Ten a couple of years, right?
Right.
So she didn't look like a freshman.
Oh yeah, no way. I think she's kind of she could be the best player on this team this year. I think. Obviously J.C. Sheldon's kind of that leader of the team, but I think what Cody McMahon was able to do last year.
Oh, I agree.
Scoring 15 points a game as a freshman is impressive, and to do what she did, game in and game out, she's going to be an All Big Ten player this year easily.
I just want to follow. The reason I bring up J.C. Sheldon especially is just to me, I'm not the biggest fan of the word the glue person, but I know where it comes from, having been a former coach. But she, to me, is like that heart and soul of that Ohio State team. And I agree totally with you about Cody McMahon. But just to me, there's just something that J.C. Sheldon brings to him that just kind of brings a calmness or whatever to that team.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's kind of similar to what you say with a Kate Martin. Obviously, J.C. Sheldon's a higher volume scorer than a Kate Martin, but those things that you can't really teach, the on the court leadership, like you said, bringing a calmness to the court. I think J.C. Sheldon and Kate Martin are kind of similar in that regard. And when you lose something like that for an extended period of time, it's hard to overcome that. Which is, like I said, I was kind of surprised. It speaks to the talent that Ohio State has on their team to get off to the start that they did last year with her not on the floor.
Yeah, I would say for me, Cody McMahon for sure is the player to watch. I would tune into Ohio State games, I think, to watch just her play. She by far, I think, was exciting. If just to remind our listeners again, she was freshman of the year last year, if you've forgotten somehow. She averaged 15 points per game. And to your point, Kyle, she did not look like a freshman. And she looked like she just belonged. So if she has any kind of a sophomore leap, like we see often from freshmen, she's going to be just an absolute nightmare, I think, for other teams to figure out how to guard her. The other person that I'm actually intrigued on is not a person coming back from Ohio State last year, but is actually coming in from Duke, which is Celeste Taylor. So she's transferring in from Duke. She's a 5'11" guard. She, was 1,000-point scorer in her career at Duke. She averaged 11 points per game, but honestly, I'm not quite sure if they're bringing her in per se for scoring, because I think they have scoring in so many other facets. To me, what's intriguing is she was Defensive Player of the Year for the ACC, and we know so much about watching Ohio State, experiencing it, and some of our Indiana games for sure. That press that Ohio State can put on you and how they can turn teams over, I wonder how she's going to fit in with that. And so I'm really intrigued to see how they fit her into their lineup, because they're, like we mentioned, very deep. And so I'm sure she's not coming there expecting to sit on the bench. So do you know anything about Celeste, or any thoughts on where she might fit into that Ohio State lineup?
I think that's the addition to, obviously, like we mentioned, they have a lot of really good players back. I think the addition of Celeste Taylor is what could bring them over the top to be a team that could make a run to the Elite Eight, Final Four type thing, because of how good their press is, forcing turnovers. They're up near the top of the country in turnovers forced last year, and to add in the ACC Defensive Player of the Year to make it even better. It's going to be hard to score against it. Not necessarily to score, but to get the ball up the floor against the press like that, and then execute a good offense against them. It's going to be tough. Celeste Taylor, I watched her against Colorado last year, because that was the matchup. Duke Colorado was the matchup that was going to figure out the Iowa Sweet 16 matchup. So I did watch that game, and Celeste Taylor had, I don't even remember how many steals it was, something like 7-8 steals in that game. You could just see on the floor her defensive presence to force turnovers, to mess up offensive sets. And like you said, I don't think her addition is to come in and score 15 points a game for Ohio State. If she scores 15 points a game, they might average 90 a game.
Right.
But she's going to be a really good defensive player for them. And where she kind of fits into that lineup, it's a little weird, because you talk about all the players that they return that started. You could make a starting lineup with the players that they return and have a really good team. So I'll be interested to see how they kind of do that early in the year. How many minutes does she play? Is there someone that we feel like should be starting that doesn't necessarily get the minutes that we would expect? Another player that I did want to mention that we haven't yet, that is back for Ohio State, is Rebecca Mikolashikova. Their forward, a really tough center that can play inside. She can also make 3-pointers as well.
Yeah.
Kind of an interesting, unique center. Kind of similar to Nebraska's forward is Alexis Markowski. Kind of not your prototypical centers for the Big Ten. You generally think of like a Monica Sonata or a Mackenzie Holmes, or the name I'm blanking on, the girl from Michigan from a couple of years ago. Those are what you think of your normal.
Yeah, Naz Hillman.
Yeah. Those are what you think of as your prototypical Big Ten centers. And Mikolashikova is kind of different in the term that she can do that. She can get down in the post and score, rebound, but she can also shoot from the 3-point line. So she's kind of a matchup, a different matchup for some Big Ten teams that I think is kind of unique for them, and maybe Nebraska is the other one that has that unique matchup. But yeah, I think Celeste Taylor is a huge addition. I think having the players that they have back are really good. I think this is a team that could make a run in March.
Yeah,
it makes me wonder if Coach McGuff brought her in almost. I know they're going to press. We know how they're going to play for the most part. But also just to be a half-court defender against some of the better guards in the league, like a Caitlin Clark, a Sydney Parrish, to maybe be a kind of a lockdown defender. With that makes me wonder about that, because I totally agree that she doesn't have to come in and score 50 points a game. She just needs to be the defender. They just need her to be an all-league defender. And by the way, Taylor Terry, who we haven't even mentioned, averaged 13.5 and was on the all-defensive team for the Big Ten last year. So there's just, like, on paper, I agree with you totally, Kyle. This is why we play the games in February and March. But on paper, this is just a lineup that is capable of, just like you said, a deep run, scoring a lot of points, because their defense can turn you over in a hurry. They did tie you in the Big Ten semi last year, where they just, once they got it rolling, you couldn't stop. It was like it became infectious. You just kept turning it over. So on paper, this team is flat out, in my opinion, loaded. But we'll wait and see what actually happens on the floor.
Yeah, and to both of all of our points, Ohio State as a team last year on average turned their opponents over 20 times a game. So if they come back and they have that kind of elite defense and turnover margin again, it's like a 6.5 at 7, almost a 7 turnover margin, and they're averaging 80 points per game. Yeah, I think they're going to be a real handful. Again, I think the biggest question, like we've already said, for them is, can they stay healthy? Because in the last few years, they really haven't shown that they've been able to keep those star players on the floor and keep that core unit and people consistently together. So that to me is the biggest question. I don't think we're questioning what they're getting back. It's whether they can get those people back and stay healthy and consistent, at least for me. So we went on record, I think both of us last week on Wednesday during a show that, and I still stick by that. I still feel Ohio State is actually the team to beat this year, with Iowa and Indiana right there knocking at the door.
So, Kyle, I know you probably haven't done as big. I hope maybe you did a little since we talked about it and getting you onto the show. But just real quick, non-conference, the big marquee matchups. Now, I think I had this twisted around. I think you were right. Ohio State will play USC. I believe that game is in Vegas. I think that's the other part of that game out in Vegas with LSU out there. But I know that's a neutral site game for them. And USC, who's preseason number 18 in the ESPN poll. They get Tennessee on the road in Knoxville. They destroyed Tennessee last year in Columbus, especially with
the second half.
In the second half.
In the second half, which was all they needed. Yeah.
Tennessee's number 9. And the one that really intrigues me here a little bit, I don't know if you've seen much of, but they're going to be a conference team by next year. They have use in the ESPN way too early. The number 3 UCLA in Columbus. Just that's to me going to be. I think that's but at least in the early, both are going to be top 10, if not top 5, when they probably play early in the season. What do you think of that matchup?
Yeah, I think those 3 are all pretty interesting. I think USC and UCLA are 2 teams that, I haven't done a lot of research on. They're teams that obviously they're ranked in the ESPN way too early. They're just teams that I'm interested to see early in the year. Are they up to the level that we think they are, just in terms of preseason ranking? So USC will be right away. We're going to learn, USC and Ohio State, how good are those 2 teams, similar to an Iowa Virginia Tech matchup. The Tennessee one, Tennessee really picked it up, in the second half later in the year last year. I think they're going to be a good team this year, and to play it on the road, Tennessee's a tough place to play. Obviously, they got them at home last year, so that would be a really good matchup. And like you said, the one with UCLA, we'll know by that time. By the time we get to that December 18th game, we're going to know how good UCLA is. So, that'd be fantastic if UCLA is up to that level of being a top 5 team, because I think Ohio State will be that level of a top 5, top 8 team, and that'll be a really big matchup at that point. But that could be one that that could be potentially an Elite 8 Final 4 matchup. If those 2 teams can play to the level that the preseason is saying they could.
Yeah. The interesting thing for me with that is, yes, to your point, Jeff, 2 of those non-conference games are going to be conference games next year with USC, right? So non-conference this year, and I guess they're just giving us a preview of conference next year. But yeah, that USC game is their first regular season game, November 6th, right out of the gate. They don't, at least on their website, maybe they have some exhibitions, or maybe they just have some, closed door practice games or something, but on their schedule, that's what they're listing is USC being their very first game. So, and then the rest of November, it's a little easier road, I think, than what both Iowa and Indiana have. But then you have Tennessee in December and UCLA, like we mentioned. So a little different setup for their non-conference than what we at least see from Iowa. So at least in terms of timing. So spread out a little bit more, getting that on December 18th, right before Christmas break. So any other thoughts, Kyle, just in general on Ohio State?
Yeah, just kind of looking at their Big Ten schedule. It's different than Iowa, obviously. But to me, I look at it and I don't really feel like there's a huge difference. They play Maryland twice, which is different than Iowa. Iowa gets them once. They do play Purdue a couple of times. Kind of interested to see what Purdue does off making the NCAA tournament last year. They get Nebraska at home, Michigan home. They have to play at Iowa late in the year. So I'm just kind of interested to see, how those games go, obviously against some really good Big Ten teams. But I don't, looking at it, I don't feel like Ohio State has anything way easier. But I mean, that's, like I said, that's just how the Big Ten is. Their last 7, they do get, their last 7 games, they do get Nebraska, Maryland, and Iowa. They also have Ohio or Michigan in there. But they get 3 of those 4 at home. So maybe down the stretch, maybe, having some of those bigger games at home before that last game at Iowa plays a little bit in their favor. But I don't, it's really hard to go through teams now or Big Ten schedules and really feel like that anyone has a huge advantage with the number of teams that are going to be good this year.
Yeah. And so, Kyle, I want to kind of throw this to you and Kathy, I want your opinion too. I'll kind of throw it around here since I'm acting as the host tonight. Kyle, for Iowa to make that run, maybe not even to the Final Four, because we know there's still some luck sometimes involved in getting to actual Final Four, but they are going to be in that they should be at least. But for them to get back to the Elite Eight and possibly get to the Final Four, what do you think are keys for them? Is there any one thing that you think has to go well for the Hawkeyes in this coming season?
Yeah, I think there's probably 2 things. I think the first thing would be that Hannah Stolke has to make a big jump from her freshman to sophomore year, which I feel like all indications are that she will. But if she can be a solid scorer, a solid rebounder, like I said, stay out of foul trouble and improve the free throw shooting, I think she can be a really good player on this team. So I think she could potentially be one of those really key players that you talk about that, depending on how far Iowa goes, it might depend on, the jump that she makes. And then I think, you could probably mix it between what do you get from the guards off the bench? Because I think the question the last few years has been, when Caitlin Clark comes off the floor, the scoring slows down a little bit. But if you can get, a Molly Davis or a Taylor McCabe to come in at times, or Sydney Fulter, if they can be players that can come in and be at least a threat to score, Iowa will not have a huge drop-off when Caitlin comes off the floor for those short times. And then obviously the Adio gradient, like I said, as long as she does not try to be Monica Sonato, she is herself. Like I said, she doesn't have to fill that role. But, as long as she's able to do a respectable job, a reasonable job, then I think Iowa has a shot to do those things, whether it's contend for a Big Ten title, contend for, a Big Ten tournament title, and contend to make the Elite Eight and Final Four again. We'll find out soon enough. We're going to get a couple exhibition games, and so the season will be started, and we'll be able to talk about, once we get to see them play. But I think those are probably the 3 biggest things. But I think that biggest thing is, what jump does Hannah Stolke make? Can she be, a double-digit scorer for this team? And I think if she does, that's going to help a lot.
Yeah.
Kathy, what do you think about the Hawkeyes?
Oh, yeah. So So if you compare, we're talking about Iowa and Ohio State and comparing the 2, I think the biggest thing for me is, again, what I mentioned earlier, Ohio State, pretty known commodity and what they're getting back, and adding an interesting piece with Celeste from Duke. It's just, to me, that's a big question, is can you get a freshman to really take that leap as a sophomore with Hannah Stolke? And often we see it, but often we don't. And so that, to me, is the biggest wild card for Iowa, in my opinion, is how much of that sophomore leap is she going to take? And, and to your point with Addison O'Grady, she did play some last year and she was coming on towards the end of the year. Does she continue that momentum into this year? To me, those are probably the 2 big wild cards for Iowa, and the biggest questions that need to be answered. We know Caitlin Clark's going to do Caitlin Clark things, so I'm I don't know. I'm going to say the words. I'm not concerned about her, but she's going to do her thing. So I think, to me, there's just bigger questions for Iowa. And that's why, again, on paper, I picked Ohio State right now over them. And similar to Indiana, I know we're not talking about our deep dive in Indiana tonight, but, there are big questions around who's going to fill Grace Berger's shoe. But we have, some good freshmen coming in. We have the same kind of expectation for our freshmen from last year, at least a couple of them taking a good sophomore leap, especially with Yarden Garzone and, her stepping up and having that sophomore leap. So we have similar questions, I think, as Iowa does. So to me, that's the intriguing question for Iowa in particular. But so Jeff and I have made our predictions right now. Kyle, if we put you pen to paper today, who would you probably put in your top, rank your top 3 for your conference finish?
Oh, I don't know about conference finish. I think if I had to do it on, like you said, on paper.
At least I didn't have you rank all of them, just 3.
Yeah. I think you have to go. like I said, it's not very common that you rank a team that has a lot of questions or questions at all in that spot. You usually go with, like I said, the team that has a lot returning, that brought in that big transfer. And to me, that's Ohio State. So that's who I would have going into the season. I would have Ohio State at 1 in the Big Ten. And then Indiana and Iowa would be 2, 3. I think you can make an argument for both. You could even make an argument that Iowa should be 3 going into the season, just because there are a couple of questions. Obviously, like you mentioned, the Graceberger question. To me, I would put Iowa at 2 just because they do have Caitlin Clark, the National Player of the Year, and Indiana at 3. But those 3, I feel like any one of those 3 could win the Big Ten title. And a team that we haven't mentioned is Maryland. Would probably put them at 4 because there's probably more questions with Maryland than with any of those other 3.
I agree. I would say, as I said earlier, I was already on the record of saying Ohio State would be the team I'd pick. But if we get to March 3rd, I don't think any of us would be surprised what the order is, but I think it's going to be those 3. But it could, I just think it's those 3, and then Maryland's capable. I agree with Kyle. I had Maryland as 4. Then that 5th spot's really kind of the one that we didn't dive into. But man, is it Illinois? Is it Purdue? Could it be Nebraska? You brought up a great point about Nebraska. So
I think you would probably say it should be Nebraska. Last year we thought it should be Nebraska as well, and it wasn't. So I think it should be Nebraska, but I could also see it being Illinois. Purdue would probably be the one that I would put as the most unlikely. But yeah, like I said, I think it should be Nebraska. We'll see.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
Before we wrap this up, Kyle, you got any last thoughts you want to share with the doing the work crowd?
I don't have any. I think we did a really good job breaking down 2 really good teams. I think we got a lot of information out there. I don't have anything to add. I think we did a good job.
Thanks. I appreciate that because we appreciate you coming on with us. So, so let's kind of wrap this up, Kathy. All right. Up next, our next episode of Doing the Work will be next Wednesday, October the 18th, 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 Central, or as we used to say in the 60s and 70s, same bat time, same bat channel. Okay, I'm showing my age. We will continue previewing in depth the expected top teams in the Big Ten. Up next week, we're going to talk about Maryland and Illinois. Assembly Call Radio will be on tomorrow night with their normal weekly show. If you want to see us do the show live and be a part of the live chat, make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/assemblycall. You can also be part of our private community as well. Find out more at assemblycall.com/community. Special thanks to John Ringer of Rig Design for designing our logos. Also, a big thank you to Bob Thompson for our music that you've heard throughout the broadcast. And thank all of you for listening. Also, again, want to thank Kyle Huesmann of Hawkeye Report for agreeing to join us tonight and being here. And hopefully, Kyle, we can get you on one more time, at least this season. Maybe we can figure out a way to get you in maybe over Christmas break or something like that, and you kind of preview a little bit of where we, into the Big Ten before it actually gets full bore or something. Or maybe we figure out a way to have you on after a post-game, like a post-game show with the IU-Iowa game, something along those lines. We really appreciate Kyle Huesmann of Hawkeye Report for joining us. Again, if you want to be in the YouTube broadcast, you can join the Workaholics here and make comments and be in the live discussion there. And again, we'll be with you next week. So until then, keep your elbow in, your eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers.
And before I actually I play our outro music for us, I had one other thing I wanted to shout out on our Back Home Network. So the Crimson Cast folks, they are recording their 1000th episode this week. I believe that will be coming out tomorrow, if I remember correctly what I heard. So I just wanted to say a huge congratulations over to Galen. Also coming back on Crimson Cast this year, we will have their women's podcast over there covering Indiana Women's Basketball Podcast. So Amanda's coming back to give a little bit different take for all of our listeners. So that's just more Back Home Network fun. But again, just huge congratulations coming out for Galen and Scott on their 1000th episode coming up. So with that, I will officially send us out.
All right. Kyle, thanks a bunch. You were great tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. We will have to find another time to try to do that during the season.
Yeah, I'd love to get you on during the season. It's nice to have, Kathy and I work nice together, but it's just interesting when you get that third person in to bring that dynamic. So
yeah, just let me know when you want to do it, and I'll see if I can fit it in.
I appreciate that, Kyle. We'll let you go because I kept you a little bit longer than I told you. So
yes.
Hope you don't hold that against us.
All right.
No, that's all right. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
See you.
Take care. Night.
Hey, everybody. We'll talk next week.